listening to Ed Lyman talk, I realized that I could take part of his presentation and change safety to economics, because the same myths, similar myths that are being presented about safety are being pushed and marketed for economics. Go to the next slide, please. Whoops. At least 9 different small SMR designs are being marketed around the world. None of them have been built and operated. So from an economic point of view, as well as Ed explained for the safety, we really don't know how much it's going to cost to build these SMRs and what it's ultimately going to cost. How long it's going to take to build them and what it's going to cost. The lead SMR design is, as Ed mentioned, NuScale Power Corporation. The original design was for each plant to include 12 nuclear reactor modules, each with 50 megawatts of power. That changed over time. Then 12 modules with 60 megawatts, and each module was 77 megawatts of power. And then NuScale is always marketed. The design is flexible, so you could have 2 modules, 4, 6, 8. Although neither NuScale nor UAMPS, which is Utah Associated Municipal Power Systems, for whom NuScale wants to build the first SMR, which they call the Carbon-Free Power Project, neither of them has announced a new cost estimate for the project. In recent years, the costs have gone up. Next slide, please. While the costs have gone up, they just haven't announced that they have. This is what NuScale is saying over the last 6 years. Actually, it's 7.5 years. I apologize. Since late 2014 would be the cost of a 12-module SMR. For a long time, it was consistent. This is just the nuclear side. This is not the full cost. This is just what's called the nuclear steam supply system. So if you think of it as the nuclear-related costs, would be $2.5 billion. And these are what are called overnight construction cost estimates that do not include financing costs or escalation, or a lot of costs that the owners of the project would pay. So for years, NuScale said $2.5 billion will get you their nuclear steam supply system, SMR, 12 modules. Rather than announce that the cost had gone up, this year they just started talking about the new cost, or they continued to talk about the cost of a 12-module SMR, but now it's $3.3 billion. So the cost has gone up 32%, even though they've not admitted to it. Next slide, please. As I mentioned last year, they decided the UAMPS project, due to be the first SMR built in the U.S., or at least proposed to be the first, was downsized from 12 to 6 modules. And it was announced that the project's estimated all-in cost that included everything, all the nuts and bolts, was reduced from 6.1 to 5.3. That should be billion, not million dollars. I apologize for that. A 13% increase. I'm sure participants who have signed contracts for power thought, wow, it's great. The cost of the plant has gone down. But while the estimated cost went down by 13%, you're only getting half the cost, half the plant, because it's only going to be 6 modules. It's kind of like going to a car dealer and telling him, well, the cost of a new Lexus has gone from 35,000 down to 20,000. We're only going to give you the front half of the car. So you're getting less for your money. And when you look at the cost on a dollar per megawatt basis, you can see in the chart there that the cost has actually gone up by anywhere between 29% and 35%. Next slide, please. The reason why the SMR marketers, who generally have what's referred to as PowerPoint proposals, because they've never been built. The reason why they want it, they're trying to convince investors and possible customers that they will be cheaper than the plants built in the past, is because the history of the nuclear industry is exactly the opposite. Arjun, at the beginning of this town hall, talked about the Vogtle nuclear project in Georgia. The cost of that project, two large nuclear reactors, has grown by over 140% during construction. Originally, it was supposed to cost $14 billion, $14 billion and change for the two reactors. Now the estimated cost is over $34 billion for the same reactors. This is an old slide. I apologize for that. Now the Georgia Public Service Commission staff estimates that the cost of power from the Vogtle plant will be $167, not $150 per megawatt hour. This slide has some more examples of nuclear plants around the world whose cost has gone up dramatically. NuScale also says that they'll build these modular reactors in a factory, only they don't have the factory yet. And they won't say when it will be or where it will be. They claim they can build it in 3 years. And as you can see, the other bars, the actual cost or currently, actual schedules of, 9 or 10 other nuclear plants now under construction or that have been completed recently are much longer than NuScale claims it'll be able to achieve. And there's no reason to believe NuScale's claims. Next slide, please. NuScale claims that this plant's going to run full time. Well, is not going to run full time. What they originally started to talk about was how it would be used to load follow, which means that if you had renewable resources online on your grid, that when the sun didn't shine or the wind didn't blow, that this reactor would crank up its power and back them up. And basically, so you would have, as Arjun talked about, you'd have power on the grid into all those hours when it was needed. Next slide, please. Only the problem with that is that because most of the cost of a nuclear power plant is fixed, which means you incur it whether you generate 1 megawatt hour or whether you run for 1 hour or whether you run for every hour in the year, the fixed costs are exactly the same. So the less the reactor runs, the higher the cost per megawatt hour. On the left here, you can see a NuScale prepared chart, which shows in the blue squiggly line, the output of a wind farm in, I think it's Idaho or Montana. And you can see that during the hours of the day, the wind goes up, generates more, and then it generates less. So when the wind power goes down, the orange line, which is the output of the NuScale reactor, will go up and will increase to make up for the decrease in the wind. Now that sounds great in theory, but what happens is that because the plant is not running full out, the cost goes up dramatically. Plant's capacity factor is a measure of how much it generates compared to what it would generate if it operated at full power for every hour of the year. In the chart on the right, you can see that if the plant operated at at what NewScale says will be a 95% capacity factor, which is almost every hour in the year, the cost will be $58 per megawatt hour. But what happens is if it follows the load, in other words, goes up when the wind power in this example goes down, the price will go up the more the less the nuclear plant is operated. And the cost becomes dramatically higher, the average cost of power. Now, the reason why this is important is that the reactor will never be operated the way they claim. It'll never be operated to kind of complement renewables. It will displace the renewables because the cost gets too high and it's not economic for the owners to operate it like that. So you can't think of nuclear as a tool to fight climate change. Instead, it's a tool that will be used by owners to displace truly lower cost and zero CO2 emission resources, wind, solar, battery storage. Next slide, please. And this is an economic analysis I did a year ago, so it doesn't affect the new Inflation Reduction Act. But you can see from numbers produced by the Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Lab, which is in Golden, Colorado. Those are the three lower lines, and that's the $58 per megawatt. The blue line that's flat is the estimated or the claimed target price for by NewScale. The reactor is much more expensive than renewables. Next slide, please. If you want to see the big report we wrote, my colleague Dennis and I wrote back in February, there's a link. If you have any questions, I know I've rushed through it, but I figure people are eager to eat, as I am. You can send me an email. I'll be happy to talk with you and answer your questions. Take care. I hope I haven't talked too fast.